What's a story you always wanted to tell on this sub, but nobody ever asked the right question? Drank 2.5 glasses of ouzo and some beer, then got thirsty and drank a lot. And I mean a lot of water. Next morning collapsed in the bathroom and ended up in a coma for 5 days. Turned out I got water poisoning. Could have died because of the booze and later because of the water, but survived both. Moral of the story: with heavy booze use small glasses. I noticed that whenever I'd order Jimmy John's for delivery, the drivers were either really uptight when I'd answer the door, or seemed very uninterested and wouldn't look at me. This was surprising, because I try to be really nice to service industry people. I was doing a group order and wanted to make a note in the comments section to bring extra napkins. When I finally pieced it all together, my account had an old comment still in the special instructions tab, saying do not make eye contact at the door. I must have made it with my friends when we were drunk as a joke and forgotten. That means the past dozen orders or so all had that attached to the order ticket without me knowing. My buddy and I went to the gym one night. It was a 24-hour gym and we're introverts, so we liked going late at night when it wasn't busy. Nobody else was there that night. It was around 1 AM on a weekday. I finished my workout first and hit the showers. I'm washing up in my little shower stall and minding my own business. Then all of a sudden, I feel cold water running down my back and my ass. That so-much buddy of mine filled up a bucket of freezing cold water, snuck up behind the stall with his eyes closed, obviously does not want to accidentally see my Dior ass, put it over the stall door and poured it. I screamed in terror because it was so ducking cold and he was laughing his ass off. I decided to get him back. I was gonna flash my D at him. I finish my shower, and I overhear footsteps coming to the change room. The change area and shower area were separated by a thin wall. I decided this was the moment. I run to the change area in my towel, whip it out and yell, "Wanna see my D?" It wasn't my buddy. It was some random guy who showed up for a late night workout. I was mortified. I showed this dude my D. My buddy was outside the locker room dying. We never saw that guy at that gym again. For good reason. TLDR. My buddy poured cold water down my naked ass. I decide to flash him my dong as payback. Flashed someone else by accident. My family was once rescued from a hurricane by a Colombian drug lord. We lived aboard a boat and our engine went out while Wilma was forming around us. We ended up having to do an emergency tack into a hurricane hole that was in his territory. He helped us fix our engine, gave us advice on our next trek so we could avoid waters that were pirate infested, and invited us to his house for dinner. I wish I knew his name because my family would have been in serious danger were it not for his kindness. TLDR. Not a story, but one time I went to sleep drunk, just after chugging 3 beers. Woke up with a boner while peeing straight up in the air. Yeah, it rained down straight on my face. I was once hanging out outside a bar in a bad part of town. My friend and I were just waiting for an Uber when a group of sketchy duckers came up and started talking to us aggressively. We were 90% sure we were going to get robbed. I was just kinda over it. I had a bad day already. I just started making a string of D jokes in conversation until the guy said this guy's weird, and left us alone. I always knew my great grandfather as the guy who lost his eye at an accident with a firecracker. This Christmas I found out that it saved his life twice. Once, because he had tickets for the Titanic, which he then missed because of the accident, and the second time, when he was supposed to fight in World War I. He went to the office where he was supposed to sign up for it, told them that he was disabled, which they did not believe. So he took his glass eye out of the socket and placed it in front of the officers. So yeah, losing an eye isn't the worst that could happen. I had a dream where terrorists were in the mall. I walked into a fast food chain and got shot. The dream didn't just end there, it ended with a wasted screen just like GTA. I destroy everything I touch, eventually. It's like a mutant power, the kind I don't want. So the story actually begins way back when my mother was pregnant with me. Our kitchen was tiny. You could literally plant one hand on a wall, lean over and plant the other on the opposite wall kind of deal. Well, one day while she's heavily pregnant with me, she's scrubbing something or the other at ground level and reaches up onto the sink to climb up when she says she got the daddy of static shocks. Hurt. She didn't think nothing of it at the time, but soon after I was born, She started to consider it the catalyst for my weird superpower. You see, as I grew up, things happened. Shop tills which had been working fine all the way up until we got there would suddenly malfunction. Light bulbs would occasionally break whenever I tried to turn lights on. It's entirely unpredictable as to when my mutant power will kick in. I've gone through 12 laptops in my lifetime, and I'm in my 30s. In my adult life, since leaving home, I have broken 6 oven elements, 8 kettles, 2 TVs, and just last week, as I made Christmas dinner, I tried to open the oven to check on the turkey and somehow, the handle that had been quite solid up until that very moment, came off in my hand. TLDR. My mutant power is bad luck. JUU. I worked at a hospital as a doctor's assistant in the orthopedics department. This one time there was a patient who stole a bunch of sheep, and when he was cornered by the police he grabbed one and jumped off of a bridge. When asked why, he said, "I thought sheep are soft like clouds so nothing will happen to me." Needless to say, he broke every single bone in his body. The second one I can't explain to this day. I was 17 at the time. I was lying in bed playing games on my phone, with my door slightly open. From my bed you can clearly see the corridor no matter what, even if the door is almost closed. My parents weren't home, probably buying groceries or something like that. After playing for a bit I got this weird feeling. A feeling that unfortunately I'm very familiar with. You know when you're alone but you can feel something staring at you? That restless feeling in your neck, back and arms. You feel like something is waiting to meet your eyes. That feeling. At this point, since I'm used to it, I usually joke around and say things like welcome, or hey what's up buddy, but I didn't this time. I was almost paralyzed, so I just kept ignoring it. I got so anxious that I glanced at my door, and that was one of the worst mistakes of my life. I saw a huge old man, with no feet, bluish long coat, white hair and beard walking from one side to the other. He was amazingly fast. Again, I was alone. 17 and I've never seen someone like this in my whole life. I ran to the door and closed it as fast as I could, sobbing in terror. I didn't hear any noises and I didn't see his face. I just know that I called my parents and they came back to find me crying. No evidence of someone breaking in. Nothing missing. Front door of my apartment completely locked. I was hanging out at the river with my friends drinking a Capri Sun when I was 8 and a grown man we didn't know pointed at me and yelled "Aye, that kid drinking Capri Sun." My friends started laughing and one of his friends yelled, "Is it good?" To this day, I can't drink Capri Sun around those friends without someone saying "Aye, that kid drinking Capri Sun." I once got locked in the laundry room at my apartment complex and had to call the cops to get me out. The most unexpected people I ever met under the least exciting circumstances. I was a janitor at a truck stop big rig mechanic place. They worked on semi-trucks, RVs, tour buses, whatever. Sometimes a mechanic was working late and there'd be some Joe Blow trucker or Midwestern family waiting to get their vehicle back. So one night I'm bebopping around, gathering trash or whatever, and turn the corner to see 6 Japanese men, wearing black leather, studs, eyeliner, spiky hair and all. The most guys I've ever seen. Of course I'm like, what the duck? But we got to talking, and I find out they're a Japanese heavy metal band called Diren Grey. Never heard of them. They were on tour and heading to Seattle when they had some issues with their bus while passing through my state, Idaho. They were nice as hell and encouraged me to look them up, and I wished them a good tour and went about my work. One of my favorite memories. Totally bananas. Sweet boys. This sounds like I am very badass, but my first house I lived at out of college had a bunch of guys above up we were really good friends with. One night I'm home alone and there's a knock on the door. I open it to a huge man in a clown mask, painted black, and grunting. Now I'm not a fighter or anything like that. Nonetheless I ripped off the mask and threw a punch, only for me to pull my punch at the last moment. It was one of the upstairs guys. He went around for the rest of the night telling anyone who would listen, "Dude, don't scare the chick downstairs." Probably the only baddest thing I've done in my life. I work as a housekeeper for the elderly. Once had a client who was 97 years old. She was the youngest of 14 children. Had only one sister who was still alive, but she lived in Canada. We live in the Netherlands. She had never been married, never had kids, and she was extremely lonely. She lived in an apartment all the way at the end of the hall and couldn't walk to the entrance anymore, so she usually just sat inside. One of her hobbies had always been painting, but then she got arthritis and couldn't hold the brushes, so she stopped. She started reading to keep the loneliness at bay, but started going blind. I was usually the only person to visit her. I was there every week for 2 hours. We talked a lot. One time, it was nearly Christmas 2011. She told me 2012 was going to be her last year. She was spot on and died the 3rd of January. The same day she told me that, I was in her kitchen humming some kind of Christmas tune. Now what you need to remember is that she was 97. Pretty much blind. Couldn't really walk anymore etc. Suddenly she said, "You couldn't hold a tone to save your life." I started laughing a little because she was so right, and she said yes. There's nothing wrong with my ears. Guess it's more one of those stories where you had to be there. But still, one of my favorite work encounters in 15 years. When I was young, I had a job and one of the tasks was to drain carboys of water. The water collected from the AC drainage. Nearest drain to dispose of it was in the men's room. So once every 2 weeks I would drain these carboys. The bathroom was small. 1 urinal, 1 stall, 1 sink. I was pouring the carboy out in the sink when the big boss came in and goes right to the urinal. Since it was a small bathroom, I thought I'd give him space and started to tip the bottle back up so I could get out of his way. Boss man has an accent I wasn't very familiar with. He says, "No, don't stop." I thought it was kind of strange dart, but maybe he has a hard time going and liked the sound of water pouring. Turns out he meant to say no, don't stop. Why? Because the plumbing was backing up. The urinal pulled Old Faithful and geysered a sweet combo of toilet water and urine all over him. He looked like he got an answer wrong on a Nickelodeon game show. It was a good time. I once got on the local news for selling pulled pork, but they switched my name with someone else's. I got my finger stuck in a door and I had to tear off my entire fingernail. I was with a friend of mine depositing a bunch of checks one time. He said, "Careful, someone is going to think you're a drug dealer with all of those checks." I said, "I would not accept checks if I was selling drugs." The teller said, "Right, it's hard enough to get drug dealers to accept US currency." One time, as an innocent child, I discovered I had no gag reflex. How, you ask? Well, we had a freaking competition in year 3 in the class because we were so bored. Each person grabbed a pencil and slowly started putting it down their throat. Whoever got the most amount of pencil in their mouth won. The teacher had just left the room to go make copies of something, so she would be gone for ages. I was the second person and immediately won when I put a 15-20 cm inside my mouth hole and didn't gag. That recess break, my friends and I played truth or dare and we all went around. I chose dare and I was dared to eat my banana whole by a girl that was in my class, and I obliged. I just became that kid in 3rd grade who had no gag reflex. When I told my family of my amazing discovery, they made the comment, "Boys will love you." And I didn't understand until a few years ago what they meant. Edit. Thanks for the upvotes, kind strangers. My dad, brother and myself took our catamaran, small 2-hulled sailboat kind of thing, out at one of the Florida Keys. We needed to cross under the 7-mile bridge to get to the beach where the rest of the family was at. We had the clearance according to my dad, but apparently the tide was in. Our mast barely clipped the side of the bridge and started to capsize, but it kind of settled and just sat there. We decided the best thing to do was to just flip it the rest of the way and go with the current. We all had great life jackets and were solid swimmers, so we weren't worried drowning. While we were trying to flip the catamaran back over, it can be done. A Coast Guard cutter pulled up and got my brother and I on board. They tied the rope from the mast to the back of the boat and got it up eventually with the help of my dad. They wrote my dad a ticket and we continued to the beach. My dad made us swear not to tell my mom. Well, that lasted about an hour because people had been fishing off of the old bridge and came to tell us at the beach that there were sharks circling us the entire time. I'm really glad I didn't know that at the time. One time when I was 12, my mom took some of her friends, my sister, my brother and I, to a crater-type lake. We rented a paddle board, which my mom used first. She bragged that she had gotten all the way across the lake in one go. Of course, being 12, I wanted to beat her. What I didn't know was that she said halfway across the lake. So, I took that paddleboard and went at it. I got so far across the lake that I couldn't see the shore. Of course I couldn't get lost, it was just a big circle, and had quite a few people who were also out on the lake ask me if I was okay. Capital I, unaware of the oddness of a preteen by herself in the middle of a lake, said yes, I was perfectly okay. When I was nearly across the lake, a rescue boat pulled up beside me. The teenage dude driving it said, "Kid, your family thinks you drowned. They're freaking out. They sent me out to make sure you were okay." He offered me a ride back and I refused. I turned my paddleboard around and went back to shore. I checked my watch and realized holy it, I was out there for 4.5 hours. My family yelled at me because my dumbass nearly gave them a heart attack by paddleboarding. TLDR, I paddleboarded for long enough that my family thought I was dead. When I was in middle school, our math classroom had a window that had a perfect view of the side and part of the front of the school, and one time while I was in class I saw the special needs kid hop the fence that surrounds the school and run. There were so many teachers after him. The police caught him and brought him back though. Funniest thing I've ever saw at that school. This might sound crazy but it's totally true. Many weird things happen to me. A lot. So I'm always scared to tell most of my friends and family because they would just think I'm crazy or something. So the first one might just be a type of condition that I'm not familiar with. When I wake up, I usually check my phone, roll around for a bit and then get up. But sometimes when I wake up I see hexagons. Like golden white hexagons that are transparent in the middle. It's not only in the center of my vision, but everywhere. They are kinda shiny and then they fade one by one. I'm 100% sure I wasn't sleeping and this already happened twice now. They last for about 3-6 seconds but it is super weird. I told my family about this one and I guess they didn't really believe me. But when I googled it and found out that there's people like me out there, I guess they did. One time I was with my buddy at the mall Christmas shopping, and while we were sitting on a bench to take a break we are approached by 4 individuals. They were telling us about their cult religion weird thing they had going on and invited us to their farm BC they wanted to teach, indoctrinate, us. My buddy and I listened to the 20-minute long spiel and at the conclusion they asked, "So, what do you say?" Before I could say anything my friend just says, "Pull my finger," and extends it to him. The 4 kind of them looked at each other confused and politely obliged. As soon as they pulled, my buddy ate himself. Literally shat. Right then and there. It was bad. And we started crying and then they just left disgusted. He said he had to go the whole time they were talking and just couldn't hold it anymore, and since he just bought new clothes he went to the bathroom and changed. I couldn't believe it. But needless to say, we didn't join a weird cult that day. When I was a kid we had a cabin on a boat access only lake. We were the only cabin on the arm of the lake and the opposite side of the lake. Think long and narrow lake. Had a train trestle and a train that would pass by twice a day and honk at us and wave. One day while we were fishing on the dock we noticed the train stop on the tracks and continue to sit there for a good hour. We didn't realize why until we saw the conductor hop out and wave at us with both arms. Not knowing what was going on we hopped in our boat and headed across the lake. Once we arrived we realized what was wrong. At the far end of the lake there was a cattle ranch. The cows had gotten out and were now wandering the tracks and blocking the train. Behind them was the trestle over the water they didn't want to cross, and in front of them was the train, whose engine was loud and they didn't want to pass. We had some colorful beach towels in the boat, so my dad, me and my twin sister jumped up to shore with our towels and proceeded to herd the cows past the train engine back towards the farm. Apparently beach towels are more terrifying than a train engine. Eventually the train gets to move on and we spend the next hour or 2 herding cattle down the tracks to the farm. We had to stop halfway and had a bit of trouble however, as one of the cows had been hit by the train and had been dragged hundreds of feet down the tracks. It wasn't pretty. It smelled awful. And my sister became a vegetarian for the next year. Eventually we got the cows home minus the one fatality. A couple years ago in university I had a girl in my sculpture class ask me what time it was. I didn't have my phone on me or my glasses, so I pointed her to the analog clock on the wall. She looked me dead in the face and said she didn't know how to read analog clocks. She could only understand digital. I couldn't contain my reaction and stood there dumbfounded by that. I still think about that sometimes. She was at least 20 plus and never took a couple minutes to figure out how. She graduated around the same time as me. She has a bachelor's degree but can't read a ducking clock. This was an ask, but I couldn't find it. I hated, and still hate, my kindergarten teacher. I'm just gonna call her W, for the sake of not revealing her name. She was awful. I have an anxiety disorder. I was nervous around new people, and she would try to tell me to stop being nervous and just go talk with the other kids. I was also afraid of the dark, like most kids were. However, one time when she turned off the lights for movie time, I cried because I was scared. She called my mom, and I cried even more. She would call my mom every time my anxiety would get in the way of some group projects. I also have arachnophobia, and we had a lesson on bugs, and she tossed a rubber spider into the group of children. It landed on my head. Let's just say it was a lot of screaming. We had a fire lesson every October. She would always tell us to stop, drop and roll. We had to practice doing exactly that. When it was my turn, I stopped, dropped, and cried. She called my mom for that too. She had been teaching kindergarten since my mom and dad were teenagers. I had always felt scared around her. Then I moved to a different town, and my first grade teacher was a lot nicer. So anyways, thanks for listening to me rant. Ever since I was young I'd have vivid dreams. Sometimes I'd even experience lucid dreaming, which I eventually learned to control. Sometimes I'd live for days, months, and as of recently, years in my dreams. When I was younger I didn't understand this. Waking up disoriented and wondering when I'd wake up from this dream. I'd spend weeks questioning reality, which, looking back, also took its toll on my social development. Whenever that happens now, because I can dream up pretty much an entire life, I spend a bit less time disoriented, because I'm an adult that understands that they're only dreams, but I'll occasionally become depressed if I dream up an entire, fulfilling life. And sometimes I dream that I've woken up, only to realize the alarm isn't shutting off and I'm still asleep. And you just keep waking up, pretty much trapped in a dream that only lasted 3 minutes and not hours. My dad went to a convenience store as a child, and bought a bag of Cheetos. When he finished the bag, he saw there was a scratch tag at the bottom, so he scratched it, and, voila, he'd won the second bag of the Cheetos of the day. So he starts eating that one, scratches the tag at the bottom, and, boom, a third bag. So, my dad gets yet another bag and finishes it. It happens again, and again, and again. Eventually, he's too full, and his Cheetos streak eventually runs out. But not before he ate 7 to 8 bags of Cheetos. He went home, almost threw up, and got rashes. Also, Happy New Year's Eve everyone.